The politician's wife humiliated her maid in front of guests. Next morning she begged her to save her son. "You think you belong at my table? Don't embarrass yourself." Eleanor Harrington's words cracked through the glittering ballroom like a whip. The chandeliers overhead trembled with the sound of crystal glasses clinking, but no noise was louder than her voice, sharpened by decades of entitlement and fear disguised as elegance. Marisol Reyes lowered her gaze, the heat of humiliation rising in her cheeks. A murmur spread among the guests, whispers disguised as polite coughs. Eleanor's hazel eyes flashed like shards of broken glass, cutting deep without drawing blood. But life has its own way of rewriting scripts. Because hours later, those same lips that spat venom would tremble with desperation. And the woman she had shamed would become the only one who could steady the Harrington name, the only one who could save what mattered most. Yes, sometimes the very hands you push away are the ones holding your tomorrow. If you're new here and love stories that reveal human pride, prejudice, and redemption in the moments that matter most, make sure to subscribe, tap that like button, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to prove stronger than anyone imagined? Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end of this one. Now let us begin. The Harrington estate stood like a palace in the heart of Washington, D.C. Its towering columns were lit by golden floodlights, its manicured lawns glistening with frost. Inside, the house hummed with the kind of restless preparation that comes before a performance. But this wasn't theater, it was politics. The marble foyer was polished so thoroughly it reflected the chandeliers like mirrors. Footmen moved in measured silence, their steps rehearsed. Silver platters gleamed on linen-covered tables, and fresh white lilies filled the air with a scent so pure it masked the tension hanging heavy in the room. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Harrington. Eleanor, 42, carried herself as though the world owed her reverence. Her floor-length gown shimmered silver, catching the light like frozen water. Diamond earrings dangled like icicles against her pale skin. Her hazel eyes were cold and calculating, the kind that could smile for photographs yet pierce like daggers in private. She was a woman born into privilege and married into influence. To her, appearances were everything. Every detail of her home, her family, her staff, reflections of her own worth. She gripped the seating chart with a hand steady from years of practice, but her lips pursed in annoyance. If the ambassador's wife sits next to Senator Gaines, it will look like favoritism, she muttered to herself, rearranging names as though moving chess pieces in a game only she understood. From the adjoining library, Charles Harrington entered. 50 years old, tall, his presence filled the room like a shadow stretching across marble. His suit, midnight blue with a subtle sheen, was cut to perfection. Charles was no ordinary host. For 2 decades, he had risen through the ranks of Washington's power circles. First as a lawyer, then as a congressman, and now as a man many whispered was destined for the governor's mansion. His salt and pepper hair lent him gravitas, his easy smile disarmed opponents, and his every word was measured as though already rehearsed for a speech. "Eleanor," he said, voice even and calm, "don't scare the guests before they arrive." She didn't look up from her chart. Her lips curled in a controlled smile. "I'm not scaring anyone, Charles. I'm preventing embarrassment, which is more than I can say for some of the help." Downstairs, far from chandeliers and crystal, Marisol Reyes adjusted the collar of her navy blouse. The mirror in the servants' quarters was cracked at the corner, but it was enough to reflect a woman of quiet dignity. Her brown eyes held the warmth of someone who had seen suffering yet refused to grow bitter. Her hair, thick and black, was braided neatly down her back. Her hands, calloused from scrubbing floors and carrying trays, were strong, steady. But those hands had once held textbooks, scalpels, and stethoscopes. Years ago, in her home country of Colombia, Marisol had trained as a nurse. She had learned to read the language of bodies, the flutter of a weak pulse, the rattle of obstructed lungs, the urgent silence before disaster. Life had rewritten her plans. Her mother's illness, mounting debts, a desperate chance at work abroad. Now she stood here, reduced in title but not in worth, known in this house as simply the maid. As she clipped on the small name tag the Harrington staff were required to wear, Marisol whispered a prayer in Spanish. It wasn't for herself. It was for her younger brother, still back home, whose tuition fees depended on every dollar she earned tonight. She had learned to carry invisibility like armor, to serve without speaking, to notice without being noticed. Yet deep inside, she carried the quiet conviction that sometimes the ones ignored today would hold tomorrow's answers. Upstairs, Eleanor swept through the kitchen like a general inspecting her troops. Her heels struck the tiles sharply, echoing with authority. Chefs in white jackets bowed their heads lower than necessary, hoping to avoid her wrath. "Remember," Eleanor said, her tone clipped, "no mistakes tonight. Not one. The Japanese delegation will be seated beside the ambassador and 2 senators. Cameras will be rolling. No interruptions. No speaking unless spoken to. You are not here to be noticed. You are here to make the Harringtons shine." Her eyes lingered on Marisol for a heartbeat too long. Something flickered there, a tension unspoken, a judgment already cast. Then with a sniff she moved on. Marisol lowered her gaze to the floor, but her thoughts whispered what her lips never could. "Sometimes, madam, the people you step over are the very ones who will carry you when you fall." From the grand staircase above, a small voice broke the air. Mari, 7-year-old Oliver Harrington, their only child, came bounding down the steps. His blonde hair was tousled from play, his tie crooked, and in his hand, he clutched a toy airplane. The plastic wings bore scratches, evidence of a boy who loved imagination more than polish. Marisol's face softened into her first real smile of the evening. "Senorito Oliver," she said gently, crouching slightly. "Shouldn't you be with your tutor?" Oliver scrunched his nose. "He's boring. You tell better stories." Before Marisol could answer, Eleanor's voice struck sharp. "Oliver, not now. Back upstairs." The boy hesitated, his small frame caught between 2 worlds. His mother's sharp authority and Marisol's quiet warmth. Then, quickly, he pressed the toy plane into Marisol's palm. A secret gesture. A wordless message of trust. Before Eleanor could scold further, Oliver dashed back up the stairs, leaving the faint sound of his laughter trailing behind him. Marisol closed her fingers around the little plane. The plastic weighed almost nothing. Yet in her hand, it felt heavier than gold. It carried the trust of a child who saw her not as invisible, but as safe. Eleanor had noticed. Her lips pressed thin. And in that instant, the stage was set. For humiliation. For crisis. For a reckoning that would expose not just the Harringtons' pride, but the fragile truth beneath their perfect facade. Because before the sun rose, Oliver's life, and the Harrington family's very legacy, would depend on the woman Eleanor sought to silence. By 7 o'clock, the Harrington estate glittered like a jewel box. The driveway brimmed with black cars, each depositing men in tailored suits and women draped in satin and pearls. Camera flashes popped at the gates as reporters strained to catch a glimpse of the guests entering one of the most important dinner parties in the capital that season. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a theater of power. Round tables draped in cream silk gleamed beneath chandeliers that rained down golden light. Each place setting was a symphony of polished silver, crystal goblets, and folded napkins sharp as origami. Eleanor Harrington floated among the tables like a queen inspecting her court. Her silver gown shimmered beneath the lights, every strand of her hair pinned into a flawless chignon. A practiced smile hovered on her lips, but her eyes darted constantly, scanning for imperfection. Charles stood near the entrance, greeting diplomats and senators with handshakes honed to precise pressure. Firm enough to convey confidence, never so hard as to bruise egos. Cameras lingered on him. Every gesture, every nod, was another stone laid on the path to the governor's mansion. While laughter and violins filled the ballroom, Marisol worked in the shadows. She moved between kitchen and dining hall with quiet efficiency, balancing silver trays heavy with hors d'oeuvres. Her blouse clung slightly in the warmth of the kitchen, but her posture remained straight, her steps silent. Each time she emerged into the ballroom, she shrank her presence, careful never to intrude on the glittering conversations above her tray. She set glasses with precision, refilled wine without comment, collected empty plates without eye contact. Invisible. That was the unspoken rule. Yet even in her silence, Marisol noticed everything. The nervous twitch of a senator's hand as he adjusted his cufflink before speaking. The way Eleanor's smile stiffened whenever Charles leaned a shade too close to a female diplomat. And most importantly, the way Oliver sat tucked on a side chair at the edge of the room, legs swinging, toy plane hidden in his lap. His eyes found Marisol often. Each time, he offered a conspiratorial smile, as though she were the only person in the grand room who understood him. Eleanor's nerves sharpened with every passing minute. She had invested weeks preparing this dinner, memorizing each guest's preferences, mapping seating so conversations would blossom into alliances. She believed she could choreograph perfection, if only the help knew their place. Her gaze followed Marisol with increasing irritation. The way the maid moved, too calm, too assured, not at Eleanor. In her mind, a servant should shrink, should tremble, should know her role. But Marisol's quiet dignity carried the unsettling air of someone who belonged more than she admitted. At one point, Marisol bent discreetly to whisper reassurance to Oliver when the boy fidgeted. Eleanor's chest tightened. Her son should look only to her, never to the help. She crossed the ballroom, her heels striking sharp against marble, and placed a manicured hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Sit properly," she instructed, her voice sweet enough for nearby ears but edged with warning. "Yes, Mama," the boy murmured, but his eyes drifted once more toward Marisol. That look, that innocent trust, fueled a storm Eleanor refused to name. Dinner unfolded with mechanical perfection. Chefs sent out courses like clockwork, waitstaff glided with practiced choreography, and conversation hummed over crystal glasses. Charles was in his element. He charmed Mr. Tanaka, the Japanese trade delegate, with anecdotes about his time abroad. He exchanged jokes with senators, nods with donors, and every laugh landed exactly as intended. Cameras captured his ease. To the outside world, the Harringtons looked untouchable. But storms rarely announce themselves with thunder first. Sometimes they arrive as whispers. Near the main table, a distinguished ambassador gestured for water. Marisol stepped forward, her tray balanced with precision. But as she leaned to pour, a guest shifted his chair suddenly. The tray wobbled. A single glass tipped, spilling across the white cloth. Gasps rose. The violin faltered mid-note. Eleanor's eyes blazed. She was on Marisol in an instant, her voice cutting sharper than the broken glass glittering on the floor. "Clumsy girl," Eleanor hissed, though the hiss carried enough force to reach every corner of the hall. Dozens of eyes turned. Senators, dignitaries, reporters. All watching. Marisol froze, her cheeks burning. She bent quickly, gathering shards with a cloth, murmuring apologies in a voice steady but low. But Eleanor wasn't finished. Not when her perfect performance had been stained, literally, in front of cameras. "Do you think this is acceptable?" she snapped. "In front of our guests? You think you belong at this table? Don't embarrass yourself, don't embarrass us." The room was silent save for the crackle of tension. Charles cleared his throat, attempting a smile to smooth over the moment. "Accidents happen, dear." But Eleanor cut him off with a glare that could silence thunder. Marisol's fingers closed around the last shard of glass. She rose, eyes downcast, dignity clinging to her like fragile glass. She whispered again, "I'm sorry, ma'am," before retreating with her tray. Her retreat did not erase the moment. It magnified it, because every guest had seen not just a spill, but a spectacle. And though Eleanor thought she had asserted control, what she had truly revealed was fear. The fear of being eclipsed, the fear of imperfection. Whispers resumed, hushed but uncontainable. The ambassador murmured something sympathetic in Japanese. A senator shook his head slightly. Charles raised his glass, forced a laugh, and shifted conversation forward. But the damage had been done. At the edge of the ballroom, Oliver slid off his chair, slipping toward the kitchen doors. He found Marisol stacking the ruined tray, her hands steady though her face betrayed the sting of humiliation. The boy tugged her sleeve. His small voice barely rose above the clamor of the kitchen. "Don't listen to Mama. You belong here." Marisol's throat tightened. She crouched, brushing a hand lightly over his blonde curls. "Go back, Nino. They'll be looking for you." He pressed the toy plane into her pocket this time, more deliberate, more secret. "Keep it. For me." Then he darted away before anyone could see. Marisol closed her eyes, the weight of the little plane pressing against her side. It was more than plastic. It was proof of trust, proof of belonging, proof that truth sometimes comes from the smallest voices. In the ballroom, Eleanor lifted her glass once more, her smile brittle, her eyes sharp. She believed she had silenced the embarrassment. But humiliation has a way of echoing louder than applause. And what Eleanor did not yet know was that the maid she reduced to a spectacle tonight would, within hours, hold the Harrington legacy and Oliver's very life in her steady hands. Because sometimes the slap of pride is answered not with revenge, but with redemption. And the true measure of a person isn't found in how they command a room, but in how they respond when the room watches them fall. By midnight, the Harrington estate stood in silence. The last cars had rolled down the frost-covered drive, the last champagne flutes had been cleared from linen tables, and only the echo of polite laughter lingered faintly in the grand halls. To the cameras, the evening had ended in triumph. Charles shaking hands with dignitaries, Eleanor smiling beneath chandeliers, Oliver tucked upstairs out of sight. But beneath the surface, fissures widened. Eleanor stood at the bay window of her private study, silk robe cinched tightly around her waist, a half-empty glass of Chardonnay trembling in her manicured hand. Her reflection in the glass showed the face of a woman who had smiled too long, stretched too thin. The humiliation scene replayed behind her eyes like a loop she couldn't stop. Clumsy girl, she had called Marisol. She had thought it decisive, commanding. But even as she spoke, she saw the diplomat's polite discomfort, the senator's raised brow, the pitying looks darted toward the maid. Control was Eleanor's armor. But tonight, control had slipped. From down the hall, Charles's voice rumbled on a phone call. Even at this hour, he was working, assuring donors, smoothing over optics, convincing everyone that the evening had been a success. A minor mishap, nothing unusual. The dinner proved our competence under pressure. Competence. Eleanor's lips curled bitterly. Was that what people saw? Competence? Or cruelty? She thought of the maid's downcast eyes, the child's stubborn trust, the way Oliver had slipped his toy plane into Marisol's pocket. Eleanor drained her glass and set it sharply on the desk. Not again, she whispered, though she didn't know whether she meant her son's defiance or her own loss of composure. Downstairs, in the quiet servants' quarters, Marisol sat on the narrow cot that served as her bed during long shifts. The toy plane rested in her palm, its plastic chipped at the edges. She turned it slowly, tracing the worn grooves with her thumb. Her blouse still carried the faint scent of spilled wine. Her cheek still burned, not from a slap but from words. Sometimes words cut deeper. She pulled a small photograph from the pocket of her apron. It showed a boy about Oliver's age, with the same mischievous grin, though darker hair and brown skin. Her brother, Matteo, back home in Colombia. School fees overdue. Rent unpaid. His dreams suspended in the balance of her wages. "Forgive me, Matteo," she whispered. "I take this so you can keep learning." Her nursing certificate, tucked into the bottom of her suitcase, seemed to mock her. Years of study, late nights memorizing anatomy, the steady pride in her mother's eyes when she first donned her student scrubs, all reduced to carrying trays for women who called her clumsy. And yet dignity remained, invisible but unbreakable. The house was quiet but not silent. From upstairs, the soft sound of feet pattering broke through the dark. Oliver, still in his dinner suit, tiptoed down the hallway with the determination only children possessed. He found his way to the servants' stairs, descending carefully, clutching a blanket around his small shoulders. He slipped into the room where Marisol sat. "Mari," he whispered. She startled, then softened. "Senorito Oliver, what are you doing out of bed?" He padded across the room and climbed onto her cot without hesitation. His toy plane was gone, but he pointed at her pocket knowingly. "You kept it." Marisol smiled faintly. "Yes, because you asked me to." "My tutor says Mama is always right," Oliver whispered, his voice small. "But I think you're right, too." Marisol's chest tightened. She brushed his hair gently. "Your Mama loves you, even when she's hard. She loves you." Oliver looked unconvinced. He curled into her lap, yawning. "Promise you won't leave." The promise lodged in her throat. She could not control tomorrow. She could not promise permanence. But she whispered anyway, "I'll stay as long as I can." The boy's breathing slowed against her, and in the dim light, Marisol knew this bond was both salvation and danger, the quiet thread that tied her fate to theirs. Unseen, from the hallway above, Eleanor stood frozen. She had come looking for Oliver, ready to scold him for wandering. But when she saw him curled against Marisol, heard his whispered trust, something inside her cracked. Her son had never nestled into her arms that way. Not since he was a baby. He sought warmth where she had built walls. Jealousy pricked her skin like needles. But beneath it was fear. What if she was being replaced? What if the maid her son adored truly knew how to comfort him better than she did? Eleanor retreated silently, her robe brushing the wall. She could not, would not, let this continue. Tomorrow, she told herself, boundaries would be redrawn. But tomorrow had its own plans. By dawn, the house buzzed again, preparing for Charles's televised interview. A news crew was scheduled to arrive, an exclusive morning feature showcasing the Harringtons, America's rising first family. Cameras. Lights. A carefully staged family breakfast to show voters a portrait of perfection. Charles rehearsed lines in his study. Eleanor directed staff with icy precision. Oliver sulked in the corner, still clutching the blanket he had taken to Marisol the night before. And Marisol? She worked quietly, setting fruit bowls, arranging silver. But her eyes caught on the grapes in the bowl, large, round, uncut. She frowned, remembering pediatric warnings. Grapes were among the leading choking hazards for children. She reached to slice them, then hesitated. Eleanor had been explicit. Do not interfere. So she left them whole. A choice that would prove fateful. Upstairs, Oliver twirled his toy plane in the air, his small fingers brushing past the grapes on the nightstand. He popped one into his mouth, unthinking, uncut. Downstairs, Eleanor smoothed her white blouse and rehearsed her smile before the cameras. And Marisol, hands steady on the tray, whispered a prayer she did not yet know she would need. Because within the hour, as cameras rolled and lights blazed, Oliver's small throat would seize, his breath would fail, and the Harrington legacy would hang by a single fragile thread. The steady hands of the woman Eleanor had humiliated. By 8 a.m., the Harrington estate looked less like a home and more like a television set. Camera crews bustled through the foyer, adjusting lights that gleamed off marble floors. Cables snaked across Persian rugs, producers whispered into headsets, and the smell of coffee mingled with powder from the makeup team. At the center of the carefully staged dining room sat a long mahogany table, set not with elegance but with calculation. Bowls of fruit gleamed under studio lights, steam curled from mugs of tea, and 3 chairs had been angled just so, perfectly positioned for the cameras that would beam the Harringtons' image into thousands of homes. This wasn't breakfast. It was theater. Eleanor swept into the room, every hair pinned, every detail manicured. She wore a pale silk blouse that reflected the light, her diamonds understated but present. Her smile had been rehearsed in the mirror, but even she knew it didn't quite reach her eyes. Charles entered moments later, his navy suit crisp, his tie a politician's shade of blue. He clasped the hands of the producer with easy confidence. "We'll give you exactly what you need," he said smoothly. And then came Oliver, 7 years old, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair slightly mussed despite Eleanor's attempt to tame it. He wore a miniature blazer, the kind meant to charm viewers with innocence. On the table before him sat the untouched bowl of fruit. Grapes, plump and whole, gleamed like polished marbles beneath the studio lights. From the edge of the room, Marisol stood with a tray in hand, her blouse pressed, her posture quiet. She had been ordered to remain invisible during the filming. Staff were told to hover just out of frame, ready to clear plates but never to be acknowledged. Her eyes, however, were not still. They tracked Oliver. The boy's restless fingers. The way he picked at the grapes. The way he toyed with the plane tucked under his arm while sneaking fruit into his mouth. Her stomach tightened. She remembered pediatric safety drills, professors repeating. Whole grapes are one of the most dangerous foods for children under 8. Her hand twitched toward the fruit knife on her tray, then stopped. Eleanor had made herself clear. Do not interfere. Marisol's lips pressed together. A storm gathered in her chest. Going live in 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on. Smiles locked into place. Good morning, America, the host beamed, turning toward the Harringtons. Today, we have an exclusive look at one of Washington's rising families. Congressman Charles Harrington, his wife Eleanor, and their lovely son Oliver. Charles leaned forward, practiced warmth in his tone. It's an honor to be here. Our family believes in transparency, in showing the world who we are behind the curtain. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Oliver's shoulder, her smile a portrait of maternal poise. "We're just like any other family," she said. "Breakfast together, sharing moments before the day begins." Oliver, distracted, popped another grape into his mouth. The cameras caught his cherubic grin, his swinging legs, his small wave to the crew. Viewers at home likely melted. But Marisol's heart thudded against her ribs. She knew what could come. It began quietly. Oliver coughed. Just once. A small, sharp sound. Eleanor gave his back a quick pat, still smiling for the cameras. "He's fine," she murmured, the kind of dismissive assurance mothers give in public. But then came a second cough. Harder. Choked. His small hand flew to his throat. The smile faltered on Eleanor's face. Charles turned his head, confusion knitting his brow. Oliver coughed again, but this time no sound followed. His mouth opened, his eyes wide, panic rising in gray irises that mirrored his father's. The grape was lodged. "Oliver?" Eleanor's voice cracked, sharp and high. She grabbed his shoulders, shaking lightly. "Sweetheart, breathe. Just cough." He couldn't. His face reddened, then tinged purple. His small fists clawed at the air. The host froze, eyes wide at the scene unfolding on live TV. Crew members exchanged frantic glances. A producer gestured wildly to cut the feed, but the cameras lingered, still recording. Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Call 911, he barked. His politician's composure cracked into raw terror. Oliver gasped weakly, eyes rolling as his body jerked in panic. Eleanor's scream pierced the room. "Somebody do something." The words landed like a command Marisol had been waiting for. Her tray clattered as she set it down. She crossed the room in 3 strides, her presence no longer invisible. "Let me help," she said, her voice steady, trained. Eleanor spun toward her, tears streaking her perfect makeup. "No, you'll hurt him." "What do you know?" "I know he's choking." Marisol's voice cut through panic with the precision of a scalpel. "I've trained for this. If we wait for the ambulance, he could die." Charles hesitated only a second before roaring. "Let her." The unspoken weight hung heavy. The maid Eleanor humiliated, now the only one standing between their son and death. Marisol knelt behind Oliver, her movements controlled, practiced. "Sweetheart," she murmured, though he could not hear. "I've got you." She bent him forward over her arm, delivering sharp back blows between his shoulder blades. Once. Twice. 3 times. The sound echoed like gunshots in the silent room. Nothing. She shifted, turning him upright, performing abdominal thrusts, precise, rhythmic, each one stronger than her slight frame suggested. Oliver's body convulsed with each push. "Come on," she whispered, sweat dampening her brow. "Breathe for me." Eleanor sobbed behind her, hands clutched to her mouth. Charles hovered, helpless, his own eyes wild. The cameras caught it all. The maid's arms wrapped around the boy, the desperation in his face, the parents paralyzed. On the 4th thrust, Oliver convulsed. A small grape shot from his lips, rolling across the polished table. He gasped a ragged, glorious sound. His chest heaved as air rushed back into starved lungs. The room exhaled as one. But Marisol wasn't finished. She tilted his head, listening, watching the color bloom back into his cheeks. She tapped his back lightly, coaxing. Another small cough rattled free, clearing the last fragments. Finally Oliver sobbed, a child's sob of fear and relief. He collapsed against Marisol's chest, clinging to her blouse. "You're okay," she whispered into his hair, her own voice breaking. "You're safe now." Eleanor collapsed into the nearest chair, sobs tearing from her chest. Her diamonds glinted in the camera lights, but for once, no one looked at them. Charles sank to his knees beside Oliver, his large hand trembling on the boy's back. His eyes met Marisol's, raw gratitude, unspoken acknowledgement. The cameras, still rolling, captured not perfection but truth. A powerful man undone, a proud woman broken, and a maid revealed as savior. The producer's voice broke through the chaos. We have to cut." But the cameras had already captured more than any political campaign could script. The Harrington heir choking, his parents paralyzed, and the maid they had dismissed rising to save him. And though the red light on the cameras blinked off, the image would burn far longer. Because what millions would see replayed later that day wasn't a polished political breakfast. It was a reckoning. A family's future, a child's life, saved not by wealth, not by power, but by the steady hands of the woman humiliated the night before. For a long moment, the dining room was still. The chandeliers blazed, the cameras still hummed with heat, but no one moved. The only sound was Oliver's sobs as he clung desperately to Marisol's blouse, his small fingers fisted in the fabric, refusing to let go. Eleanor's breath came in shallow bursts. Her carefully rehearsed smile was gone, replaced by blotched cheeks and streaked mascara. She looked less like a socialite and more like a frightened mother stripped bare. Charles still knelt at Oliver's side, his polished politician's composure shattered. His silver tie hung loose, his hand trembled where it stroked his son's hair. His eyes, usually steady as marble, brimmed with tears he did not bother to hide. And standing at the center of it all, Marisol held Oliver, steady as a lighthouse in storm. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Her voice cracked, no longer sharp, no longer commanding. "Oh God, my baby!" She lurched forward, reaching for Oliver. But when she touched his shoulder, he only buried his face deeper into Marisol's chest, clinging tighter. The rejection pierced Eleanor deeper than any insult could. She recoiled as though burned, her hands fluttering helplessly in the air before falling limp to her lap. The cameras had been cut, but the memory of what they captured hung heavy. Staff stood frozen at the edges of the room, eyes wide, witnesses to a moment that would alter everything. Charles looked up at Marisol, his voice low, roughened by panic and relief. "You saved him," he said simply. The words carried weight beyond gratitude, an acknowledgement, a confession, an apology he could not yet voice. Marisol shook her head slightly, her own eyes wet. He was choking. "I just did what needed to be done." But Charles didn't look away. His gaze lingered, steady, as though seeing her truly for the first time. Not as staff, not as invisible, but as equal. Eleanor pressed trembling hands to her mouth, her breath hitching in sobs. She looked at Marisol, this woman she had called clumsy, dismissed, humiliated before senators, and saw her son alive in her arms. Jealousy, pride, control, all of it shattered. What remained was raw fear, raw love, raw truth. She whispered, almost too soft to hear. "I don't understand, why would you after what I—" Her words dissolved into sobs. Marisol looked at her, compassion flickering despite the pain of humiliation. "Because he's a child. And when a child needs saving, nothing else matters." The words landed like a stone in Eleanor's chest. She dropped her face into her hands, shoulders shaking with a grief that had little to do with the choking itself, and everything to do with the reflection she had just seen of herself. But the world beyond the Harrington estate was not silent. By noon, clips of the live broadcast flooded social media. The network had cut away, but not before viewers at home saw Oliver's panic, Eleanor's frozen hands, Charles's frantic shout for help. Rumors spread. "Did you see the boy choking? The mother just sat there. Someone from the staff saved him. Who was she?" Within hours, hashtags trended. Hashtag Harrington Crisis. Hashtag The Maid Who Saved. Reporters swarmed the gates. News vans lined the street. Anchors replayed the footage on loops, speculating about the unseen savior whose arms cradled the boy when the cameras cut. The Harrington campaign team panicked. What was supposed to be a polished family portrait had become a viral moment of imperfection. And at the heart of it stood Marisol Reyes, the woman they had trained the world not to see. In the quiet of the servants' quarters, Marisol sat alone, Oliver still curled in her lap, refusing to release her. Her hands shook now, the adrenaline ebbing. She pressed a kiss to the boy's hair, whispering softly in Spanish, "Estás bien, mi niño." "You're all right." Her mind replayed the moment. The grape lodged Eleanor's frozen eyes, the back blows, the thrusts, the ragged gasp of life returning. She knew how close it had been. Seconds. Just seconds between survival and tragedy. Her nursing instructor's voices echoed in her memory. "Stay calm. Act fast. Trust your training." She had. And it had saved him. But what would it cost her now? The door creaked open. Eleanor stood framed in the light, her robe hastily thrown back on, her face blotched and raw. For once, she did not look like a socialite. She looked like a mother stripped of armor. Her voice trembled. May I hold him?" Oliver stirred, eyes heavy but awake. He blinked at his mother, then clung tighter to Marisol. "No, Mama. Mari stays." The words cut Eleanor like glass. She pressed a hand against the wall for balance. Marisol looked up at her, her tone steady but gentle. He's safe. He just needs calm right now. Eleanor's lips quivered. She nodded once, silent tears spilling down her cheeks. And then, for the first time in years, she whispered something that sounded like truth. Thank you. The weight of that thank you hung heavy. In that moment, everything inverted. The woman who had commanded obedience now bent beneath gratitude. The maid she had humiliated now held the family's future in her arms. And though Eleanor did not yet know how to live with this shift, she knew one thing. She would never again look at Marisol as invisible. But the world was not done watching. Reporters clamored outside, headlines multiplied, and the Harrington campaign strategists whispered furiously in Charles's study. The Harringtons had spent decades building an image of control, perfection, untouchable authority. And now, their future would be judged not by a handshake or a speech, but by how they treated the woman who saved their son. Because sometimes the cameras don't capture the image you plan. Sometimes they capture the truth. And the truth has a way of demanding change. By noon, the Harrington estate no longer looked like a sanctuary of wealth. It looked like a fortress under siege. Satellite trucks lined the street. Reporters clustered at the iron gates, microphones bristling like spears, their voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. Congressman Harrington, can you confirm reports that your son nearly choked to death on live television? Mrs. Harrington, why was the staff member the one to act, not you? Who is the mystery woman the cameras caught holding your child? Flashes popped each time the heavy oak gates creaked, capturing every movement of staff who dared step outside. Helicopters circled above, the rhythmic thump of blades cutting through the winter sky. The Harrington name had always thrived on control. Today it was chaos. In the study, blinds drawn tight, Charles paced like a caged animal. His phone buzzed endlessly, donors, party leaders, journalists, all demanding answers. His staff huddled at laptops, drafting statements, debating strategy. We spin it as resilience, one aide insisted. Family under pressure, child saved, no tragedy. Another shook his head. No, the story is out of their hands. Social media is flooded with clips. People are asking about the maid. We need her name. Charles pinched the bridge of his nose. He'd faced scandals, debates, political ambushes, but never this. Never a crisis where the truth was written not in polls, but in his son's gasping sobs and the steady arms of a woman he'd barely spoken to. Across the hall, Eleanor sat before a gilded mirror, the same mirror where she once rehearsed smiles. Now it reflected a stranger. Her silk blouse was wrinkled, her diamonds set aside. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed red from hours of tears. She replayed it again and again. The moment Oliver turned away from her arms, clinging to Marisol instead. The rejection cut deeper than the world's judgment. You froze, she whispered to her reflection. You froze when he needed you. Her fingers trembled as she touched the glass, as if begging the woman inside for answers. For years, she had believed perfection was protection. But perfection had cracked in front of millions, and what had shown through was something raw, something ugly. Down in her small room, Marisol sat rigid on the cot, listening to the faint roar of reporters outside. She had tried to resume her duties, to fold linens, to scrub counters. But staff whispered, eyes followed, and every news alert blared her unseen face. The maid who saved the Harrington heir. Heroic staffer prevents tragedy on live TV. Questions raised about Harrington parenting. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't wanted attention. She had acted on instinct, on training. But the world did not care about intentions. The world wanted a story. She thought of her brother Matteo, of debts unpaid. Would this notoriety help or harm? She pressed her palms together in prayer, whispering for guidance, for strength. The inevitable came in the late afternoon. A campaign aide knocked at Marisol's door, eyes nervous. Mrs. Harrington would like to see you. The walk to the drawing room felt endless. Marble floors stretched like judgment beneath her steps. When she entered, Eleanor and Charles sat waiting, the tension between them thick as storm clouds. Charles rose first, his voice formal. Marisol, the press knows someone from our household saved Oliver. They want your name. Your face. They'll find it with or without our help. Eleanor's lips tightened. Which means we have to decide how this is handled. Marisol stood silent, her hands clasped. She had stood before professors, before patients' families, but never before a family who both employed and humiliated her. Eleanor's voice quivered with something halfway between fear and pride. "You embarrassed me last night," she began, her words brittle. "You humiliated me in front of senators." Marisol inhaled slowly, steady. She said nothing. "But today," Eleanor's voice cracked. She looked at Oliver, asleep on the sofa beside her, still clutching the blanket. "Today you saved him." And the world saw. Her hazel eyes lifted to meet Marisol's. For the first time, they did not burn with superiority. They burned with vulnerability. "I don't know how to thank you, or how to survive what comes next." Charles stepped in, voice firm. "We tell the truth. We tell them our son's life was saved by a woman with training and courage. We tell them we're grateful." "That's it." Eleanor flinched. "Do you know what they'll say? That we're careless. That we can't protect our own son without the help of." Her words faltered. She couldn't bring herself to say it. "Without the help of someone we should have respected all along." Charles finished quietly. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. For the first time, Marisol spoke clearly, her voice calm but unyielding. "I don't want to be a symbol. I don't want headlines. I just want to work, to provide for my family. But I will not let anyone rewrite what happened. Your son was choking. You froze. I didn't." Her words were not cruel, but they were sharp with truth. Eleanor winced as though struck, but she did not deny it. A knock interrupted. Another aide entered, pale. "The press is demanding a statement within the hour. If you don't speak, they'll write their own." Charles nodded grimly. "Then we speak." His eyes flicked to Marisol. But not without her. Eleanor stiffened. To share a stage with the maid she had once humiliated felt like swallowing glass. But the alternative, silence, lies, more humiliation, was worse. She drew a trembling breath. "Then God help us." As the Harringtons prepared to face the cameras, the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Eleanor, once untouchable, now stood on the edge of public judgment. Charles, once confident, now relied on a woman he had barely acknowledged. And Marisol, once invisible, now carried the weight of truth she never sought. Because sometimes the moment you fear most isn't the crisis itself. It's what comes after, when the world demands you answer for who you really are. The Harrington estate's grand foyer, usually reserved for diplomats and donors, had been transformed overnight into a press room. A podium stood before the gilded staircase, flanked by American flags. Lights blazed down from mounted rigs, casting sharp shadows against marble walls. Rows of reporters filled the space, pens poised, cameras aimed, microphones craning forward like hungry mouths. The air buzzed with anticipation, a storm of questions waiting to break. Charles adjusted his tie, his jaw tight. Eleanor stood beside him, shoulders stiff, her silver blouse pristine again but her eyes rimmed with fatigue. And just behind them, hesitant but present, stood Marisol Reyes, the maid the world was desperate to see. Oliver was kept upstairs with a nurse. His absence was deliberate, protective. But his presence lingered in every word about to be spoken. As Charles stepped to the podium, the room erupted in flashes and shouts. "Congressman, is your son all right? Who is the woman behind you? Mrs. Harrington, why didn't you act when your child was in danger?" Eleanor's jaw clenched. Her manicured hand gripped the edge of the podium until her knuckles whitened. Charles raised a steady hand. "Please, one at a time." The room quieted enough for his voice to cut through. "Yes, it is true. This morning, during a live interview, our son Oliver choked on a piece of fruit. It was a terrifying moment for our family. But thanks to quick action," he turned, his hand gesturing toward Marisol. "Thanks to this woman, our son is alive and well." The cameras swung toward her. For the first time, Marisol felt the full weight of the world's gaze. The girl who once scrubbed floors in silence now stood bathed in lights brighter than any chandelier, her name on every reporter's tongue. Marisol bowed her head slightly, her braid falling over one shoulder. She had not dressed for spectacle, just a simple blouse, plain slacks. But her dignity radiated stronger than diamonds. Flashes popped. Her face would be plastered on headlines by morning. Then came the question Eleanor dreaded most. "Mrs. Harrington," a reporter called sharply, "the footage shows you froze. The staff member acted while you stood by. How do you explain that?" The question cut the air like a blade. Gasps, murmurs, a collective lean forward. Eleanor's breath caught. For years she had wielded words like weapons. But now her arsenal was empty. Her pride wrestled with her shame, with the image of her son clinging to Marisol instead of her. Her lips trembled. "I," she faltered. The room waited. Charles's hand brushed hers lightly, urging. But no words came. Finally, her voice cracked through the silence. "They're right." I froze. The admission was raw, unvarnished. Eleanor's chin trembled, tears gathering in hazel eyes that had always gleamed with superiority. In that moment, I wasn't a hostess or a politician's wife. I was just a mother. And I failed. A murmur rippled through the press corps. Not disdain, but shock. Honesty was rare currency here. Eleanor turned, facing Marisol fully. For the first time, in front of cameras, her voice broke with humility. But this woman, Marisol, did not fail. She saw what we couldn't. She saved my son. And for that, I will never be able to repay her. The weight of the words struck the room like a bell. Flashes exploded again. Reporters scribbled furiously. And in that moment, the audience at home would see something unexpected. Not a perfect family portrait, but a crack in the marble, a glimpse of something human. A reporter's voice rang out. "Miss Reyes, will you speak?" Marisol froze. She had not planned to. But silence now would be rewritten by others. She stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't save Oliver for cameras. I didn't save him for politics. I saved him because he's a child. And when a child is in danger, nothing else matters." The room hushed. Her words were not rehearsed, not polished. They were true. "And I'm not special," she continued. "There are thousands of women like me, maids, nurses, caregivers, who go unseen every day. We don't have wealth. We don't have power. But we have hands that work, hearts that care. And sometimes, that's what saves the world's children." Her voice quivered, but it carried. Reporters scribbled. A cameraman lowered his lens just to wipe his eyes. Sensing the tide shifting, Charles leaned in, his voice resonant. "This is the story America needs to hear. Not about politics. Not about perfection. But about people who step up when it matters. Marisol is part of our family now, and we are proud to say so." The declaration landed like thunder. Eleanor stiffened beside him, pride and pain battling still. But she did not contradict. She lowered her head, letting tears fall freely, the cameras catching every drop. The press conference ended in a frenzy of shouts and flashes. Headlines were already writing themselves. Harrington's thank maid who saved son. Mother admits she froze during crisis. Invisible hero speaks for the unseen. But beneath the noise, something quieter had begun. Eleanor's armor was cracking. Charles's ambition had bent toward humility. And Marisol, once invisible, had spoken truth the world could not unhear. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come in silence. It comes when the world demands you speak. By evening, the Harrington estate was quiet again. The reporters had dispersed, the satellite vans rolled away, and the gilded foyer, once filled with flashbulbs and shouting, returned to silence. But silence does not erase echoes. It deepens them. In the dining room, the same polished table that had borne fruit bowls and choking gasps now stood empty. The chandeliers glowed softly, their light less stage, more reflection. Charles lingered in his study, phones finally set aside. He had given his speeches, faced the questions, played his part. But the weight of the day pressed against his shoulders. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to sag into a chair unguarded. Eleanor sat upstairs in Oliver's room. Her once immaculate blouse crumpled beneath the weight of a small boy asleep across her lap. His toy plane rested on the nightstand. His breathing was steady, safe. And Marisol, in her small quarters below, folded her uniform carefully, each crease smoothed, each thread aligned, as though order could steady the storm still raging inside her. In the soft lamplight of Oliver's room, Eleanor traced her son's small fingers against her palm. Hours earlier, those fingers had clawed at the air, desperate for breath. Hours earlier, he had turned not to her, but to Marisol. She had always believed control equaled love. That if she perfected every smile, every dinner party, every detail, her son would see stability, and stability would mean affection. But love, she realized, was not built from perfection. It was built from presence. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, landing on Oliver's hair. She whispered to the dark. I failed you, but I will learn. The words were not a performance. No cameras, no reporters. Just a mother speaking to the boy who had nearly slipped from her grasp. In her room, Marisol pulled the small photograph of her brother Mateo from her apron pocket. She studied his smile, the innocence in his eyes. Today had changed everything. Her name was on headlines, her face on screens. Strangers praised her as a hero. Yet all she wanted was enough money for Mateo's schooling, a chance to use the skills she had studied for, a life lived with dignity. She pressed the photo to her heart. One day, hermano, she whispered. One day I will be more than invisible. For you. The toy plane Oliver had slipped into her pocket still rested beside her on the cot. She picked it up, turned it slowly in her hand. It was a reminder. Even children see truth when adults refuse. Downstairs, Charles stood at the study window, watching reporters fade into taillights. His reflection stared back, the image of a man who had nearly lost everything in seconds. He had built his career on speeches, on control of narrative. But this moment, this rescue, had not been controlled. It had been raw, unscripted, real. And the world had responded more to that truth than to years of his polished performances. He exhaled, slow and long. Maybe, he murmured, this is the beginning, not the end. And for the first time, ambition bent toward humility. Later, when Oliver stirred and rubbed his eyes, he whispered one name. Mari. Eleanor's chest tightened. But instead of silencing him, she nodded. Would you like to see her? The boy nodded sleepily. Together, mother and child padded down the long hallway, Eleanor's arm guiding him. They stopped before Marisol's small door. When Marisol opened it, startled, Oliver darted forward, wrapping his arms around her waist. Thank you, he murmured into her blouse. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching. Her pride itched, her instinct to reclaim control tugged at her tongue. But instead, she swallowed, stepped forward, and said words she had never said before. I was wrong. Marisol blinked, stunned. Eleanor's voice trembled, but she did not stop. I judged you. I humiliated you. And yet, you saved my son. You saved me. I don't know how to undo what I did. But I am asking you, please let me try. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Oliver's steady breath against Marisol's blouse. Marisol's eyes softened, though pain lingered there. She did not offer easy forgiveness. But she offered a path. I don't need words, Mrs. Harrington. I need respect. Not just for me, for all of us who serve unseen. That is how you make this right. Eleanor's throat tightened. She nodded slowly, her hazel eyes shimmering with sincerity for perhaps the first time. Charles appeared in the hallway then, his gaze moving between the women, the boy, the fragile moment of truth. He placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. She's right, he said simply. And just like that, the first stone of redemption was laid. The next days would bring more headlines, more scrutiny, more politics. But inside the Harrington estate, change had already begun. Eleanor no longer saw Marisol as invisible. She saw her as the woman who had shown her what love looked like when pride failed. Charles no longer treated staff as background. He saw in Marisol a reminder that leadership meant listening to the unseen. And Oliver, innocent, wide-eyed Oliver, never stopped carrying his toy plane, never stopped reminding the adults around him that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. Because in the end, the story was never just about a maid or a politician's family. It was about the power of humility, the strength of unseen hands, and the redemption that comes when pride gives way to humanity. And to you listening now, what do you see in this story? Do you see the maid humiliated, or the woman redeemed? Do you see the boy choking, or the family learning how to breathe again? Perhaps it is a reminder for all of us, to see those who are unseen, to honor dignity wherever it stands, and to remember that sometimes the ones we dismiss are the very ones who will save us. And if this story touched you, share it with someone in your life who may need reminding that redemption is always possible.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and more intriguing than you can ever imagine.